November 3, 2023. 2:17 a.m. The Packard Automotive Plant, a rotting, 3.5 million square foot automobile factory on the east side of Detroit, Michigan. Abandoned and forgotten since 2010. Camera 7, mounted high above the main assembly floor, shows nothing but darkness and decay. Massive conveyor belts, frozen welding arms, and enormous 20-ton hydraulic presses stand silent in the vast industrial hall. Thick dust hangs in the air like fog. The emergency lights barely glow. For almost a full minute, the footage is completely still. Then, without any warning and with no power connected, the main conveyor belt violently jerks forward. The metal screeches like it's in pain. A welding station that hasn't worked in 13 years suddenly explodes with bright orange sparks, lighting up the entire floor in flashes. Seconds later, the giant hydraulic press begins slamming down repeatedly, boom, 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 each impact shaking the camera and echoing through the empty factory like thunder. The sounds are so loud they distort the microphone. This wasn't a glitch. Something had just turned the dead factory back on. Background and location, 2:30 to 7:30, the Packard plant was once a legend of American industry. Built in 1903, it produced some of the most luxurious cars in the world. Generations of Detroit workers walked its floors. But after decades of decline, the factory finally closed its gates forever in 2010. Since then, it has become one of the largest abandoned industrial sites in America, a dangerous, collapsing maze of broken windows, falling roofs, flooded basements, and miles of dark assembly lines. Only a bare-bones security system with 22 cameras was left running, mainly to stop scrap metal thieves. The local security company hired just one night guard to monitor the entire complex from a small trailer parked outside the main gate. That guard was Marcus Reed. Marcus Reed is a 44-year-old African-American man, tall and heavily built, with short-cropped black hair graying at the temples, and a serious, hardened face marked by a visible scar above his left eyebrow. He wore the standard dark navy security uniform with reflective stripes and a company badge on his chest. He always carried a powerful industrial flashlight in one hand and a surveillance tablet connected to the central system in the other. Marcus had been working the night shift at the Packard plant for 6 weeks. He thought it was easy money, sitting in a trailer, drinking coffee, and occasionally driving around the perimeter. He often joked that the only thing he had to fear was boredom. He would never say that again after November 3rd, first strange event, 7:30 to 11:30, at 2:17 a.m., Marcus was sitting in the security trailer, half dozing, when the monitors suddenly lit up with red motion alerts from multiple cameras. He sat up straight and quickly switched to camera 7, the main assembly floor. What he saw made his blood run cold. The conveyor belt was running at full speed. Welding arms that had been dead for years were sparking wildly, throwing bright orange light across the darkness. The massive hydraulic press was hammering down again and again with terrifying force, even though every power cable to that section had been cut and locked years ago. Marcus stared at the screen for several seconds, unable to believe what he was seeing. Then he grabbed his industrial flashlight and tablet, put on his jacket, and headed toward the factory. He entered through the east loading dock at 2:21 a.m. The moment his boots stepped onto the main assembly floor, the camera footage shows something chilling. Everything stopped. The conveyor belt froze mid-motion. The welding sparks died instantly. The hydraulic press went completely silent. Dead, heavy silence returned to the factory. Marcus moved slowly through the enormous hall, his flashlight beam cutting through the thick dust. His voice can be heard on the body camera audio. "What the hell is going on here?" He walked straight to the main power panel. It was still locked, rusted, and clearly disconnected. No breakers had been flipped. No one could have turned any of this machinery on. As Marcus stood there confused, sweeping his light across the silent machines, the overhead catwalk camera captured something he never saw with his own eyes. A shadowy human figure wearing old factory overalls and a hard hat stood completely still on the metal walkway above him. The figure was watching Marcus below, head slightly tilted, motionless. Marcus felt the temperature drop suddenly. The air became ice cold. For the first time in his 16 years of security work, he felt genuine fear crawling up his spine. He didn't know why. But the camera knew. This was only the beginning. Marcus Reed stood alone in the middle of the vast, silent assembly floor of the Packard automotive plant at 2:23 a.m. His industrial flashlight beam trembled slightly as he swept it across the massive machinery. The conveyor belt, welding arms, and hydraulic press had all gone completely dead the moment he stepped inside. The only sound was his own breathing and the crunch of broken glass under his boots. He immediately walked back to the security trailer, heart still pounding, and began reviewing the raw footage frame by frame. He exported the clips from camera 7 and watched them multiple times in slow motion. The machinery had activated with real mechanical force, not just lights flickering. The hydraulic press had slammed down with enough power to crush metal, even though it had no electricity. Marcus noticed something disturbing in the technical data. The timestamp on the video and the system log showed a consistent 0.7-second delay every time the machinery started. It was as if something was manually overriding the system from inside the factory. At 3:12 a.m., a second major event occurred. Camera 9, located on the upper catwalk, captured a group of shadowy worker figures walking slowly across the assembly floor. There were at least 6 of them, all wearing old-style factory overalls and hard hats. They moved with purpose, as if they were on a normal night shift. One figure stopped near the welding station and appeared to adjust something that wasn't there. Marcus watched the live feed in real time. He grabbed his flashlight again and went back inside. When he reached the assembly floor, the figures were gone. But the welding station was now warm to the touch, as if it had been running for hours. Evidence analysis and technical discoveries, 1730 to 2400 hours. By morning, Marcus had compiled a detailed report with timestamps, exported video files, and his own observations. He contacted the security company's technical team in Detroit. 2 technicians arrived later that day and ran full diagnostics on the entire system. All 22 cameras were functioning normally. No malware. No remote access. The power supply to the main assembly floor had been physically cut and locked since 2010. Yet the footage clearly showed the machinery operating at full capacity. The technicians found only one anomaly: during every activation, the old factory intercom system, which had been disconnected for years, was somehow receiving power and transmitting low-frequency audio. When enhanced, faint voices could be heard in the background, men shouting short commands like, "Line 2, keep it moving," and, "Watch your hands on the press." The voices had a strong Detroit accent from the 1980s, 90s era. Marcus began keeping a personal voice log on his tablet. His entry that afternoon read, "They're not random shadows. They're working. And they know the factory better than I ever will." Escalating strange events, 2400 hours to 32:00, over the next 9 nights, the activity became more frequent and aggressive. On November 5 at 1:58 a.m., Camera 12 recorded the entire conveyor belt system running at full speed for 4 straight minutes. Shadowy worker figures were clearly visible loading invisible parts onto the line. One figure even appeared to signal to another across the floor. On November 8 at 2:44 a.m., the hydraulic press activated again, but this time it was synchronized with footsteps. Marcus, who was on patrol inside the factory, heard heavy boots walking on the metal catwalk above him. When he pointed his flashlight upward, he saw nothing, but the catwalk camera captured 3 shadowy figures standing directly above him, looking down. On November 10 at 3:07 a.m., the most disturbing footage yet was recorded. Camera 7 showed approximately 12 shadowy workers gathered in a circle near the main press. They stood completely still for almost a minute, then suddenly turned their heads in unison toward the camera, as if they knew they were being watched. One figure stepped forward and pointed directly at the lens before the entire group vanished. Marcus started refusing solo patrols on the main floor. He began carrying a second flashlight and recording voice memos every hour. In one recording from November 11th, his voice is clearly shaking. "I keep feeling like I'm interrupting their shift. Like I'm the one who doesn't belong here." By November 12th, the phenomena had become interactive. Whenever Marcus stayed in the trailer, the activity was relatively mild. The moment he entered the factory, the machinery would activate and the shadowy figures would appear closer and closer to his position. Further escalation, 32:00 to 38:00, on November 13th at 2:31 a.m., Marcus was doing a routine check on the assembly floor when every emergency light on the main floor suddenly turned on at full brightness. The old factory PA system crackled to life with a loud static burst. A distorted male voice came through, deep and authoritative. "Second shift, back to your stations. We've got a quota to meet." Marcus froze. The voice was not his. It sounded exactly like an old factory foreman from decades ago. Immediately after the announcement, the conveyor belt, welding stations, and presses all activated simultaneously. Shadowy workers appeared in large numbers, moving with urgency across the floor as if trying to meet a production deadline. Marcus backed out slowly, never turning his back on the machinery. As he reached the loading dock exit, the overhead catwalk camera captured one final chilling detail: a single shadowy figure in overalls standing alone, watching Marcus leave. The figure raised its hand in a slow, deliberate wave. Marcus did not wave back. That night, in his final log entry before the situation reached its breaking point, Marcus said, "They're not ghosts. They're still clocking in every night. And I think they're getting tired of me being here." The night of November 14th, 2023 would become the most documented and terrifying night in the history of the abandoned Packard automotive plant. At 1:51 a.m., every single one of the 22 cameras in the factory activated at the same time. Marcus Reed was in the security trailer when the monitors lit up like a Christmas tree. He watched in horror as the main assembly floor came alive again, but this time it was different. This time it felt organized. The conveyor belt started moving at full production speed. Welding stations sparked in perfect rhythm. The giant hydraulic press began slamming down in a steady, industrial cadence. Shadowy worker figures, at least 20 of them, appeared across the floor, moving with purpose as if they were on a real night shift trying to meet a quota. Marcus could hear the machinery roaring even from inside the trailer. He grabbed his industrial flashlight and tablet and made the decision to confront whatever was happening. He entered the factory through the east loading dock at 1:55 a.m. The moment he stepped onto the assembly floor, the emergency lights on the entire main level turned on at full brightness, bathing the vast space in a sickly yellow glow. The noise was overwhelming. Shadowy figures moved all around him, some carrying invisible parts, others operating machines that should have been dead for over a decade. Marcus walked slowly through the chaos, his flashlight beam cutting through the thick dust. The figures didn't run away. Some even turned their heads to look at him as he passed. At 2:08 a.m., the old factory PA system crackled to life again. The same deep, authoritative voice from the previous night came through, clearer this time: "Second shift. We're behind schedule. Everyone back to stations. Keep the line moving." Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. The voice echoed through the entire factory. Immediately after the announcement, the shadowy workers increased their pace. The machinery grew louder. Sparks flew higher. Marcus raised his flashlight toward the catwalk. That's when he saw it clearly for the first time. A tall shadowy figure in old factory overalls and a hard hat stood on the metal walkway directly above the main press. Unlike the others, this one was more solid. It raised its arm and pointed straight down at Marcus. Major discovery and technical breakthrough, 48:00 to 55:00. Later that night, back in the trailer, Marcus made a critical discovery while reviewing the raw footage. He isolated the audio from the PA system and ran it through basic enhancement software on his tablet. What he heard sent chills down his spine. The voices weren't random. They were real conversations from the plant's past. He could hear workers talking about the quota for the night, the new supervisor is riding us hard, and tell Jimmy to watch his hands on the press. The accents and slang were unmistakably from Detroit factory workers of the late 1980s and early 1990s. Then came the most disturbing part. During the final PA announcement, after the voice said, "Keep the line moving," a second, quieter voice could be heard in the background whispering, "He's watching us again, the new guy." Marcus realized with growing dread that the shadowy figures were aware of him. They knew he was there every night. They knew when he entered the factory. He cross-checked old employee records that were still stored in the abandoned office building. Several of the names he heard on the enhanced audio matched workers who had died in industrial accidents inside the Packard plant between 1987 and 1994, crushed by machinery, electrocuted, or killed in falls from catwalks. The factory hadn't just been haunted by random ghosts. It was still running its night shift. Climax and the final night, 55:00 to 1 hour and 3 minutes, on November 15th, Marcus decided he couldn't take it anymore. He stayed on the assembly floor the entire night, determined to document everything or force whatever was there to stop. At 2:37 a.m., the activity reached its terrifying peak. All the machinery activated at maximum power simultaneously. The conveyor belt screamed. The welding stations created a blinding light show. The hydraulic press hammered down so hard the floor vibrated. Dozens of shadowy worker figures filled the assembly floor, moving urgently around Marcus as if he wasn't even there. Then the PA system came on one last time. The deep voice announced, "Attention all second shift. We have a visitor tonight. Let's show him how we do things at Packard." Immediately after, every shadowy figure on the floor stopped working and turned their heads toward Marcus in perfect unison. The tall figure on the catwalk stepped forward to the edge and pointed directly at him again. Marcus started backing toward the exit. As he moved, the figures began walking slowly toward him, surrounding him from all sides. Their movements were no longer ghostly, they felt deliberate and threatening. At 2:51 a.m., all 22 cameras lost signal for 94 seconds, the longest blackout yet. When the feeds returned, Marcus was seen running out of the east loading dock, breathing heavily, his uniform soaked with sweat. Behind him, the machinery was still running at full power. The shadowy workers had returned to their stations as if nothing had happened. But one final detail was captured on camera 3 near the exit. A single shadowy figure in overalls stood at the loading dock door, watching Marcus run away. It raised its hand and gave a slow, deliberate wave, the same wave from nights earlier. Unresolved mystery ending, 1 hour and 3 minutes to 1 hour and 8 minutes, Marcus Reed resigned the very next morning. He refused to return to the Packard plant even to collect his final paycheck. In his last official statement to the security company, he said, "I thought I was guarding an empty factory. But that factory was never empty. They're still working the night shift, and they don't want me there anymore." The security company eventually removed most of the cameras due to repeated system failures. However, a few remote monitors are still active. To this day, late-night operators occasionally report sudden activity on the remaining cameras, conveyor belts starting by themselves, welding sparks in the darkness, and shadowy figures moving across the main assembly floor. The Packard automotive plant still stands abandoned on the east side of Detroit, a decaying giant filled with rust, broken glass, and something that refuses to clock out. Some local urban explorers who have sneaked inside claim to hear the distant sound of machinery running at night, and the faint voices of workers calling out shift changes. The night shift at the Packard plant never ended. There's still